listening to the Live with Audacity podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Stewart. Audacity is defined by Merriam-Webster as intrepid boldness or disregard for normal constraints. And that's exactly what we have here. The Live with Audacity podcast is aimed at giving you the courage to explore your someday dreams, do things your way, and start making things happen in your life right now. I'm a mama to 4 kiddos ranging from college student to kindergartner, wife to a high school football and track coach, and a multi-passionate entrepreneur. Together with my guests, we're going to teach you how to live with audacity and intentionality, discover and utilize your unique skills and talents, and step into who you are meant to be in order to make your someday dreams a reality. Are you ready? Here we go. Welcome back. You're listening to episode number 51. Today's episode is a fun one because I get to talk to Megan Spaulding about her new period app, NSYNC. Hello, boy band fans. I'm just kidding. This has nothing to do with JT, but everything to do with tracking your cycle to know how it affects your energy, your mood, your productivity, and how to use that to help you plan out your month. If you are a woman with a period and you're alive, this episode is for you. Let's dive in. Welcome to the show, Megan.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
I am so excited to talk to you about this because I think it's really exciting to be able to do exactly what your app is going to help us do, which obviously I want you to explain it. But what I'm gathering so far is that the app is going to help me track my cycles and figure out kind of where I'm at in my cycle and kind of my moods, what to expect, and then also help me communicate those things to my husband, my spouse. Tell us a little bit about it and kind of how it came to be, and then, kind of clear any of that up for me.
Yeah, totally. Well, I have been a freelancer for some time now. That's how I still pay my bills. And so how it actually started was as a freelancer, I would be getting on sales calls, and I love people. I love talking to people, and I love sales calls because I get to meet new people. I'm a type 7 on the Enneagram, if you're familiar
Me
with
too.
Yes. So I'm like all of the people, all of the time. I love it. I just want to talk to you.
Everybody.
But they're right, exactly. Everyone is my best friend.
Yep.
No, this is such a caveat. But last night I was talking to my husband and I was like, do you want to know what my favorite cereal is? And he was like, yeah, what's your favorite cereal? And I was like, I go, well, I have a few. And I'm like, that's the most 7 thing ever. Like, I have a few favorites. Let me give you a few, not one.
Yeah. And also hilarious that you just blurt out like, hey, do you want to know my favorite cereal? Because my husband tells me all the time, we talk about, well, you didn't listen or whatever. And he's like, maybe it's because you talk too much. Like, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. Yes. My husband's a type 5 on the Enneagram. So he's much more internal than me. So he's like, he's about the same with, you talk a lot.
Well, we keep it interesting. That's for sure.
That is for sure. But anyways, so back to the app rather than cereal, which cereal's a great But yeah, so I've been a freelancer. I was hopping on these sales calls, and like I said, I normally love talking to people, and there would be times when I would get on these calls and I would find like I was just really irritable. I didn't want to be on the calls. I just wasn't feeling myself, and I started like wondering what was wrong. I'm like, what is wrong with me? Because it's so drastically different than how I normally am. Mm-hmm. And I'm also, I should say, I've never considered myself to be someone who like has PMS. Like I don't really notice any major fluctuations, but except for with these sales calls. And I'm like, what's going on? And so I started kind of tracking it, not even knowing that I should be thinking about this from a cycle standpoint. And I actually had a girlfriend mention something about, do you think it's related to your cycle? And so I started looking at it and I'm like, wait a second, this is happening at the same time every single month that I'm underperforming or not wanting to be on these sales calls that I normally love being on. And so this started in me. I'm like, wait a second, my cycle affects me way more than I thought it was. And I started looking even deeper into it and realized there's things like negative self-talk is often hormonal. Like, that's crazy that I didn't know that until I was 28 years old. And now I know. And it's weird because it's normally around my fertility window, not my PMS area. Normally around my fertility window, I start like just bashing on myself internally. And now I'm like, okay, this happens every month. So now I can be like, okay, I can deal with this.
I know you just said, I can't believe it took me till I was, this age, 28. Is that what you said? 28?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, sister, I just turned 39 and I didn't know that. So I'm excited about this. Oh man, this is going to be so informative. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was just like, I'm like, oh my gosh, like nobody is talking about this. And I feel like they're starting to, for sure. But the apps that are on the market, and this is what was like bothering me when I came to this realization of like just how much I changed throughout my cycle. And it's not drastic, so I didn't notice it before. I didn't worry about it. I didn't look into it. It's slight stuff, but there is change that happens. And so I'm looking at these apps and I'm like, these apps aren't telling me anything except for when I'm going to bleed. Like, right. That's it.
It's and true.
I'm like, that's great. Like, I don't like being surprised with my period, but there is so much more that I can learn from my cycle and be able to harness, because like, understanding how it affects you means that, especially as a freelancer, I can, schedule out my weeks or my months based on when I'm going to be doing certain tasks better and the weeks that I need to give myself less work to do. So that's how the idea was born right there, that frustration of like, there's all these apps, there's hundreds of period tracker apps on the market. And in my opinion, not one does a really good job of coming at it from the side of one, how things affect your mood, and educating you on all of the different things at play hormonally and how they might be affecting different aspects of your life. So that was kind of like work.
I love that you saw a need and you just jumped right into it, because I actually had the same exact thing happen to me, but I still obviously didn't know enough to look. I'm never going to make an app. Okay. So you have nothing to worry about. But I started reading the book by Kate Northrup, Do Less, which was kind of, her focus is on the cycle and the different parts of your cycle and when you're more productive and, when you're least productive and things like that. So, so you talking about this made me think of that. And when I was reading that book, I looked for an app and I was trying to find something that would help me figure out, because I don't actually know what the different cycles are called and what typically happens during those different, cycle parts of the cycle. And so when I was looking for an app, you're right, I didn't find anything that was going to help me with that. So, I'm so happy that you took charge and just were like, I'll do it myself. So tell us more.
Yeah, well, that was exactly it. I was just so frustrated. And I do have, and I've had dreams to be in the tech atmosphere for so long. And it's funny, like I had been wrestling forever with like this idea, like I knew I wanted to be like a tech CEO. Like I just knew it, like to my core. And I do a lot of things. I'm very multi-passionate. People have to ask me what I do and I often answer. I think
like,
the easier.
A little bit of this, a little bit of that.
I'm like,
Welcome to being a 7.
I do everything else. But yes, that's so true. Multi-passionate 7s.
Oh yeah.
But that was like my heart's cry, like I knew. And so I'd been wrestling, like, all the good ideas are taken. Like Facebook's done, Google's done, like it's done. Everyone's done everything. And so when this like popped up, and it's actually funny. I'm getting a little ahead of myself because it's so when this first popped up, I did not think this was a viable business plan at all. Like, at all. I thought this would be great, but it's never going to make me money. And so I put it in my back pocket, and I ended up going to a thing called Startup Weekend, which they're all over the country. Our particular town, Redding, California, up in NorCal, has a pretty vibrant startup community. And so they put on this Startup Weekend. I ended up going, and I was going to pitch a different idea, an idea that I had been brewing on as like my potential entry into the tech world. It was like, we won't get into what it was because it's confusing. And Startup Weekend, you only have 1 minute to pitch your idea. And so I was pitching my, and you can never have worked on it before. It has to be at idea phase. Like that's kind of the deal. And so I was telling my husband before I was about to leave for this event, and I was like, I think I'm going to pitch this idea that I've had and just, see if it has any legs. And I'm explaining it to him, and I'm taking like 10 minutes to explain this other idea, and he does not get it. And I'm like, if I can't explain this to you in 10 minutes, I'm not going to be able to explain it in 60 seconds at Startup Weekend.
No way. Yeah.
Right. So I pivoted, and I'm like, well, I have this period tracker idea. There's no legs to it. There's no way it'll make money. But I can at least explain it in 1 minute and maybe win this weekend. And so I ended up pitching it, and we ended up winning the whole weekend. So it's a 54-hour event. So you're like, you build a business over a weekend.
Get out of here. Are you kidding?
Like, it is the most fun I've ever had. Like, I just wish I could do it every week. It was so much fun.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
Yeah. So we did that, ended up winning. And actually, from that, we had some investors approach us after, and I say us, it's only me now. I was the only one that moved forward. But I had some investors approach me, and they were basically like, this is a really viable business. And if you are interested in potentially bringing on investors for this, like, we're interested. And so that kind of was like so eye-opening to me, of like this little idea that I'm really passionate about. I just didn't think it was worth the time. Like, I didn't think it could make any money. And over this weekend, and like talking to these two investors that expressed interest, it's like, oh gosh, this could make way more money than anything I've ever thought of. Like, which
that's so cool.
It was just really cool. I'm like, I had no clue. I had this thing, like, I mean, I've had this idea for probably years at this point, in my back pocket, just thinking, oh, like maybe as a passion project one day. And then coming to realize through talking to people who are smarter than me and understand how the tech world works and how they're able to offer like free or low cost things and still make a lot of money. It's like, oh, wait a second, like this has just been right under my nose this whole time. My tech idea that I've been looking for.
That's so funny. Talk about divine intervention, right?
Right. It was
timing.
Totally yes. Yeah. It was like one day I was just a girl with a full service marketing firm, like fighting burnout like so bad. And the next day, all of a sudden I am launched into like what is honestly like the heart dream I didn't know I had. Like, I had no clue I wanted to be known around town as the period girl. Like, who thinks they would enjoy that? So, like, being outside in Redding, which we're a very close-knit community, it's a town of about 100,000, and people just know each other. Like, I have people come up to me like, oh, you're that period girl from Startup Weekend. And I'm like, yes, yes, I am, and I actually love that.
Oh my gosh, that's so neat. Okay, so tell us, pitch your app to us. How does it work?
Yeah, so that's what I'm really, really excited about, is just how personalized this app is going to be. We're focusing really on couples to start, but another space is the freelancers, because that was my pain point. And those are the two big pain points I've seen, is like the freelancers knowing how to like schedule around their cycles. And then specifically men feeling really in the dark about this topic, and women not knowing how to communicate with them. Actually, when we did our user research, it was 75% of men said that they wanted more tools to help support their significant other throughout her cycle. And 65% of women said that they wanted more support from their spouse. And so like
I
those
love
numbers
that.
were like, whoa, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
This is a huge problem that no one's talking about. So how we've solved this problem is first off, like how the app will work is you're inputting your cycle just like you do in any other app, but you're also inputting your mood and other symptoms. And so we're taking that data and we're really eventually, right now it's a little clunky because we're in beta, but eventually this will be taking that, putting it into a machine learning kind of code, and the machine will slowly get to know you and how you personally respond to your hormones and how you personally are throughout your cycle.
Yeah.
So it will learn you, be able to feed that back to you, and then give you advice on how you can kind of manage those things. And it'll forecast. So you can tell, because that's my pain point. When should I not schedule sales calls? Well, that's
Yeah.
the information that we're hoping to be able to give. And on a very individual level, because the fact is that everyone, there might be some common terms, but every single solitary woman responds differently to her hormones than the girl next to her.
Yeah.
And that's with the fertility window, what I was talking about earlier. I experienced some anxiety and some internal self-negative talk during my fertility window, when a lot of women are at the height. They're feeling the best about themselves, right?
Yeah.
So that's the goal, is to like not only give women the tools to understand, okay, what should be happening right now, but how do you personally respond to your hormones? So that's step one. That's the woman facing side of it. And then what we found was that, couples were really having a hard time communicating, and that men felt really in the dark and they didn't feel like they were allowed to ask questions about
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, and this is actually came from my own marriage, because I'm telling my husband about this idea and he's like, I would kind of like that information too. And
I
I
love
was like,
that.
yeah. I'm like, I think I would like you to have that information.
Right. And a
Um,
lot of time when we're actually in that place where we're just like, we're cranky and we don't really know why, and the app can help us figure out why we're being so cranky at the same time every month. And then being able to help us communicate that with our spouse and say, oh, hey, by the way, I finally put this together and this is why, rather than him insulting us being like, oh,
right,
are you just having PMS? And you're like,
right,
raw.
exactly. There's a right and a wrong way to talk about things, but it's so like nuanced. And I think America as a culture is pretty uncomfortable with periods. We're getting better, but we're still really uncomfortable. Like, it's hard. I don't know. Me, before Startup Weekend, I had no freaking clue how to talk about my period with my husband. None. I hated talking about it. I had like my period pants that like when they were on, he just knew me, because I was so uncomfortable. Like, and
That's
and I have,
hilarious.
yeah, I don't know. I'm like, I don't want to talk about that. Please don't. And he was more open about it than I was. And I was like, no, I'm not talking about my period with you. Like, just no. It was just no.
Right?
And
It
then,
feels like we're made to kind of feel like we're gross or we're disgusting or
right,
we're weird. Not weird, but like just like a
yeah,
total turn
you're
off. And,
ashamed
we,
of or something.
yeah, and we
Like,
already feel that way ourselves. And
right.
then when you look at us like we're gross, it's like, thanks, homie.
Exactly. So that's just the culture. And so that's that's a big thing that we want to fight with NSYNC, of like, okay, let's be normal, because what we've realized too in our research in putting this app together is that men aren't actually afraid of periods. Women are way more uncomfortable talking about their periods than men are wanting to hear about it. Like they
Really?
actually
That's so cool to know.
desperately want to know. Like they want to connect with us. They want to understand our bodies. They want to be able to serve us and communicate with us how is best for us. Like they truly care and they just want to understand, and they feel largely in the dark right now, which was super fascinating. I mean, I had no idea. I just thought men would respond to this and be like, ugh. Now we've built a whole company around this aspect of couples because of the demand that we've seen from men and this super large pain point in couples not knowing how to communicate about this.
I love it so much. And right, like it's not just a problem during the days where you actually have your period, but
Right.
it can really fester and kind of be a problem throughout the whole month because like you said, again, we go back to those places where it's like, okay, this is not PMS. What is wrong with me? What's going on? Why do I feel like
Yeah.
this? And giving us that clarity
Mm-hmm.
helps, right? Helps us not only communicate with our spouse, but um what am I trying to say? It opens up that whole space and that whole it feels like kind of
It
like a
just helps.
tornado. It does, right? Like you just pick up a little bit here and a little bit there and just, it kind of starts to swirl around and develop into these big things when
Yeah.
really it's just that, yeah, it's just the time of the month that we feel weird or down or even like
Mhm.
overly joyful and make commitments that later next week we're going to be like, why did I
Oh,
do that?
that is so real. That is so real.
Yeah, I know.
That just hit
I,
me to my core.
also a problem with sevens.
Definitely a problem with sevens. I'm like, oh my gosh, my estrogen is on the rise. I just booked 5 billion sales calls and they're all for the week before my period when I'm feeling my worst. And I'm like, why?
Oh,
Why? And I'm
why?
like, I need my own app. Get your app done, Megan.
I love that so much. Oh my gosh. This is going to be life changing for the universe. I just know it.
Well, I certainly hope so. If nobody else uses it, I will be using it because I know I need this
I got
so
my
bad.
hand up. Me too. Me too. Oh my
Oh.
gosh, I love it. Okay, so if someone wanted to get into creating their own app, how would
Mhm.
you suggest they go about it?
Yeah, well, first off, depending on where you're located, there are a ton of startup communities popping up all across America. I mean, like if Redding, California has a like I know it's California. We're not the cool part of California, okay? We're basically Oregon. Sounds cooler than it is. Although I love Redding. It is beautiful and everyone should come visit because the mountains are gorgeous and we have all the lakes. But anyways, I digress. Um, there are all these little communities that are popping up and like people who like genuinely are getting really excited about tech. And they're usually right under your nose. And so I would look up startup, whatever city you're in, and see if they have something going on. I know, like I'm thinking even up here, and of course we are relatively close to San Francisco, but every town that I can think of in Northern California, like Chico, and Eugene, Oregon, and Medford, Oregon. All the towns around, they all have their own startup communities, and these are not big towns. So I would imagine that wherever these listeners are listening in from, that they have a startup community close to them. So that's my first tip. That has been so, I can't even tell you how major that has been because the tech world works so differently from anything else I've experienced in business. And you should see that because how many free apps are there? How much free stuff
Right.
is there in tech? They're doing
Yeah.
stuff differently. They have a different game plan. They're doing different things. I mean, half of the tech companies aren't even in the black until year 5. They're running on investor money until like the year 5, if that. Some of them, Uber. for example, still is losing money every year because they're playing a different game. And so you kind of have to like relearn business in
Oh,
the tech
wow.
space, because it's definitely, I feel like tech more than anything is a long play. It's a long play, either looking to play towards an exit, which is, you hear about the tech companies that get acquired for millions, or if you're looking to play, a lot of people will start with something free, build up their user base, and then exit and then create more products that are generate more income once they have that large user base. And so it's just different. So highly suggest you get involved and get to know people that at least are talking about this same thing, because it's different.
So if we wanted to find a startup community in our area, how would we go about that? Where do we look? What are the terms I Google?
Yeah. Yep. Typically they're called startup, whatever city you're in. So like here it's Startup Reading. Chico's actually Chico Start. So it normally has some throwback to startup. There are also Google. Oh gosh, and I'm gonna forget the name. Google has groups across the world. We actually have a Google group here as well. It's not quite as active as our Startup Reading group is, but Google has these different groups that meet all over, and so Google is a good place to go check where the Google, I think it's Grow with Google, or Google developers meetings. I don't know. I should know that.
No, that's okay.
But that's one. And then Startup Weekend. Startup Weekends are all across the world, all across the globe, literally, in Africa, in Asia, in America, in small towns and big cities. And so I would look into one of those. That's a really great place to meet co-founders as well, and to get your ideas going, and you learn a lot about startup life over that weekend. So that's something else I would suggest.
So cool. I love it so much. Okay. So now we've gotten in some groups. What is next?
Yep. So what's next is you start dating co-founders. Typically in the tech world, you're going to need more than just yourself. That's the process that I'm currently in. I've gone on quite a few dates and haven't found the one that I'm going to marry yet. But that's something that you want to start thinking about, is like, what do you need that you don't have? Especially if you want to grow something big, if you're looking to be one of those like household type of names, it's not something you can do by yourself. And so like even Mark Zuckerberg, yeah, he is Facebook, right? He still didn't do that by, nor does he. He's an interesting leader in that he has brought all the smart people around him, and basically runs on the advice of other people. But so thinking about like, what do you need that you can't do? For me, that I am blessed enough to be, I already was in development, and so I already knew how to code. So I'm actually coding my own app. But what I need, is someone who knows finance really well, and so knowing that about yourself, and like being able to start looking and dating, and not rushing into those relationships either, because that is so important to make sure that if you're birthing something that is, so big and something you care about, making sure like you are looking at those co-founders like you are getting married to them.
Yeah.
And so that's a big one. Of course, figuring out how you're going to develop the thing. And that either looks like teaching yourself, which is what I did, or it looks like finding a developer, which can often, often with tech, the hard part and why it can be hard to get into is there's often a high dollar amount to get into that space. It's just high development costs. And so, which is why I chose to teach myself iOS, because I'm like, this is the path of least resistance.
Right.
But the good thing is that there are other options within that. A lot of people will start with what's called a minimum viable product. And so that doesn't necessarily have to look like an app straight off the gate. That could look like maybe a website that serves people in that way and sends out maybe just emails about periods and like grows the audience in a different way. And then the purpose of that is either one, offering something that's going to make you enough money to be able to pay for that development, or two, growing that base so that you can then go present to investors, which is usually the route in tech. Usually when you're looking to build an app, particularly an app that you want to take to market in a big way and have millions of users rather than thousands, you're looking at angel investors. And so what angel investors are is they're investors that will invest in early stage startups. Sometimes they'll invest at the idea stage. Sometimes they want a little bit more proof that the idea has legs. It totally depends on the investor. And that's something too that your local startup community can usually get you connected to. There's a lot of angel investor groups that are in small towns as well, because it's really interesting the economic impacts that angel investing can have on a city. And so normally those startup groups are at least know of the angel groups that are around, if they're not directly in your city.
That is so fascinating that it's like a whole other world. Like you said, from separate from business as a whole, it's just like its own world. And it's so interesting to me too, because my son actually he graduated high school and his plan was to be a software engineer. And so it's really interesting. He asked me the other day, he said, if I could build you an app, what would you want? And so, we just kind of started brainstorming and things like that. So this is really cool information for anyone who wants to start an app, whether it be, for periods or something totally different for finance or growing a business or anything really. So I think this information is so vital to people that want to dream big and do something that they never thought possible. Back to periods. Tell us, just a quick segue. Tell us a little bit about the different parts of our cycle and kind of, and maybe a little bit of what's typical for us to expect during those times.
Totally. So typically your cycle has kind of 4 major sections. You have, of course, your period, right? And what's interesting is a lot of people, there can be some tiredness, especially at the beginning of your period, because what you're coming out of is, in order to get your period starting, your estrogen basically crashes, hence PMS. That's typically about a week before your period, which kind of allows everything to start happening and also makes you not feeling your best and stressed out, or however you respond to those hormones, whether that's stress or depression or, that again, that just goes back to how you personally respond. But a lot of that time that looks like stress, irritability, we've all heard the PMS symptoms, right? And then within your period, you have the first few days you can feel a little tired, especially, you have loss of blood, whatever. Well, not technically blood, but your body's doing a lot of work.
True.
But around day 2 or 3, your estrogen will start going back up. And so often by day 2 or 3 of your period, you're going to start feeling a lot better. All of your negative mood stuff is usually out the door early in your period, if not even like slightly before your period. So you kind of start mellowing out, still maybe a little bit tired, but certainly not as bad as the week before. And then you go into, if you look at periods as like, a lot of people look at them as or their cycles as like seasons. So your period would be winter, and then you come into spring, which is from your period onto your fertility window. And is kind of a really great time to be working on just stuff that's exciting, things to dream. Like, this is a great time to dream. Women are often really motivated during this time, really inspired and creative. And then you'll hit fertility, which is when your estrogen is at its peak. And that happens usually, so it's a little weird. It happens 14 days before your period. So rather than like tracked from the last one, it's actually tracked backwards.
I thank you. Freaking thank you. After 4 babies, I'm so tired of being asked when was my last period because I'm like, that doesn't have anything to do with it, but thanks for coming.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And when was your
So
last
glad
period?
we
And then
got that
also,
out.
how long is your cycle and how long is, yeah. It's like you need more information than that to get
Yeah,
an accurate ovulation date.
I know. And
Um,
that's why people are always like, but I just know that's not the day. And you're like, yeah, because it's probably not the day.
right. Exactly. Yes.
Anywho, we could talk about
Yeah.
that probably all day long. Anywho,
Oh
move
yeah.
along.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like the medical, I mean, just the amount of information that's out there about women's bodies. I mean, like, oh my gosh, this is so sidetracked, but there's a book, Period Power by Maisie Hill. I think that's her name. But in the book, it's like first chapter. It's like talks about how they didn't even map the female reproductive system until like the 80s. Like they didn't even autopsy it until the 80s. Like they had no freaking clue. And medical books, like sex ed books, still like, and this is like might be a little TMI, but they still don't have, like, a lot of them don't have the proper whatever description of the clitoris. Like it's not the right shape in a lot of books
That's
because
so
how
wild.
not like adverse to the female experience like we seem to be.
Have
I'm
you
like,
Oh my gosh, so there's this episode of The Goop Lab, with Gwyneth Paltrow.
yeah,
Have you seen it?
I have not, but people keep telling me that I have to.
You really should because it's so
Like,
it's so interesting. My husband was like, "I cannot watch this." But I love that we're like actually starting to have these conversations, right? And we're,
yeah,
I mean, yes, it's on Netflix and, it's rated whatever. And so, kind of going into it what to expect, but like it doesn't have to be so weird.
yeah, right, right.
Yeah. It's a hard space, I'm sure, to get people to be comfortable with it.
Yeah, what I'm loving too, and this is so funny because I'm talking to understand the most of the people that I'm talking to about this, especially in the business world, are like 60-year-old white dudes,
Of
and
course.
I expected them to be like, no, stay with the status quo, and it's like it is so strange to me because even because I thought, oh, surely I know my husband's into this, and I think most younger men are, but surely the old men are still like, no, let women be women, and that's just not the case. It's like they are equally as interested, and a lot of them have already done the work, with their spouses. I had men that would be like, oh, we did natural family planning, and I used to track her. Like I would go and look at her things so that I could get to understand where she was in her cycle and how she was responding, and so like it's crazy. It's like we have this perception that like, or at least I did, I won't say we totally, but I mean I thought that men just, I don't know, thought periods were gross and didn't want to know
Yeah.
about it. And it's like, no, that's not the case. Everyone wants to talk about this. Everyone wants to understand it. Every single person I've talked to, nobody has been like, nah, I'll pass.
That's
Not one
so
person.
funny. I think too, right? Like we it's so funny. I feel like our minds don't realize that the older we get, also the older the other people get too, right? And so, like,
Yeah.
60-year-old guys, 60-year-old white guys right now, well, when we were teenagers, they were in their mid 40s, or, they were in their late 30s or whatever. And so
Right.
they're not like the typical 60-year-old white guy that you have sitting in your head,
Right.
right? Like they're
Yeah.
70s babies. So they're a little
Yeah.
more open-minded than we would expect.
Yes, totally. And they're the decision makers, and it's like they're way more, I don't know. I just have this like picture of like, I don't know, like Mad Men. Like I don't like
Thanks,
the
media.
worst character on Mad Men. And that's what I expect to be like running up against. And those people just aren't there anymore. The people who have that kind of mindset around women, they're just, I don't know, they're in nursing homes, I guess. I don't know, but they're not there. Like
I love
people are
that.
so for women right now, and they're so open minded, and they see these problems. Like they're not stupid. Like they're not.
Yeah, I love
Um, they're like, good Lord, yes, this is the answer that we've. It's the elephant in the room that nobody knows how to talk about, but everyone wants to.
so genius. Okay, so we've hit fertility. The fertility couple of days. Tell me again, because I didn't write it down, and just refresh me. What are we typically feeling during that time?
Mhm.
Super high, right?
Super high. Fertility is summer, so you are like at all time high, all time motivation. Typically, unless you're like Megan, who responds to estrogen peaks with anxiety, which that is actually
Mhm.
relatively common. That some people experience some stress around that. But yeah,
Okay.
but typically high motivation. And even with me, I still have high motivation. It's like at the end of my day when I'll start spiraling. Um, but
Overstimulated and just like kind
overstimulate,
of done.
that's exactly what happens to me. I get so overstimulated and because I have so much going on and I'm so excited, that I kind of massively overstimulate myself. But typically, and I say all that because I want women to know, if you're feeling weird around your fertility window, it's not just you. But typically you're the life of the party. It's the best time of your cycle. You love it. Um,
Okay,
and so
what
yeah.
happens to us after that?
hmm So after fertility, which is when your egg drops, you can get pregnant, all that stuff. Um, the body realizes I am not pregnant, and it starts going through the cycle of shedding your uterine lining. And so, in order to do that, that's when we're coming into the PMS, and it starts taking your estrogen down, so that process can happen. And as your estrogen is crashing, is when we hit that PMS, and we're not feeling our best. Um, and yeah, that brings
Okay.
us right back around to that.
Awesome. Right to PMS. Fantastic. Okay. Wow. So awesome. Man, that's a lot to take in. Um okay, good. Good, good, good. No, I'm just thinking like, okay, when I'm trying to do the math in my head about what I should be feeling.
Right.
um
Right. And that's hard too, because it's not an easy like divide by 4 and how like what's your cycle length divide by 4. It's like, no, actually, your spring time is your longest of your cycle windows. So from when you end your period to
oh,
when ovulation hits is really closer to 2 weeks rather than one, because your
yeah.
fertility window can be rather short, and you know, and your period isn't a full week, and et cetera, et cetera. But
So, no, that's really valuable to point out, because a lot of times people think like, okay, this week I do this, and this week I do that, and this week I do this. And I was going to say, when you said that, your icon for your app is designed perfectly like that, where it's, different parts are a little bit longer, and then the other parts are a little bit shorter, and so it really reflects exactly what you just said, how it's
right,
not all equal stages. They
right.
kind of fluctuate, and some can be shorter, some can be longer, and things like that. So genius, by the way, on that icon. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, tell us lastly, what
Mhm.
is something that you wish you would have done sooner?
Something that I wish I would have done sooner. That's a really good question. Um, okay, I know exactly the answer. It's weird because it's not necessarily something to do. But when I first jumped into this, I felt like I was in the deep end of a pool and I didn't know how to swim. Because while I've been in business for some time and was raised in an entrepreneurial family, I have not done tech business and it's different. And so I took all of the advice from anyone who would give it to me, which left me basically with a bunch of different advice. And I spiraled out at the beginning of this journey because I was like, I trust all these people and they're saying different things, which left me not knowing what to do. And
Mm-hmm.
not trusting my own voice. And so what I wish I would have done earlier is, even though I was in a space that was new to me, I wish I would have trusted myself and my gut earlier, because I would be much further faster.
I am so freaking glad you said that because I recently had this same revelation where I really, and I keep telling this, I'm telling anyone who will listen, I unfollowed all the Facebook groups, business
Yep.
entrepreneur groups I was in. I essentially unfollowed different coaches and stuff because, a lot of us are in the same space and know a lot of the same people. And
Right.
everyone has their opinion. And so I really just had to drown out the noise and
Mhm.
to be able to hear myself again and
Right.
really know, okay, what's aligned with Melissa? What is Melissa
Mhm.
really looking for in her business and in her life and things like that? And so it just makes me so happy that that's what you said, because I want people to understand you can get advice and tips and tricks and information elsewhere, but the person it really has to matter to is what it feels like to you. And
Right.
trust yourself, freaking
Mhm.
trust yourself.
Yes. Yeah, totally. And as an example, just real quick, I'm in talks with our local angels group, which is our investors group, and I had a person who was coming on as my CTO. That was the plan. And I had a lot of like gut feelings. Like, he had a long resume. I mean, he was freaking impressive on paper. And I just had the gut feeling like this is not the right partnership with me. But because of his resume, I was so afraid to let that partnership go. Um, and I'm like, oh, my investors, like, they're gonna not want to invest if this falls through, and blah blah blah. And I had all this like fear and all these assumptions. Well, when I called the guy who's the kind of head angel guy. I give him a call and I'm like, hey, I just need to talk this through with you. I think I'm gonna give him the boot. Like, is that gonna affect my standing with you guys? And he's like, no. He's like, we were kind of not sure why you had him on board to begin with. And so it's
Oh,
like, he's
wow.
like, not that there was anything wrong with him. It just wasn't you. Like, because they do know me quite well at this point. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So
You're
it's
like,
like,
why didn't anyone tell me?
your gut is so much more like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can trust myself. And I knew, like, and I don't know. And there are people, I would say I've given about 3 people a voice in my life, and more often than not, those 3 people, not like a strong voice. I've given a lot of people like a voice, but a strong voice where I trust them more than I trust myself, which is so important. um but normally those 3 people are aligned in what they're telling me. Um,
Yeah.
if they're not, then I know that I fall back on what I am really feeling a gut, and I still have to
Hmm.
feel good about the advice that they're giving me. So I don't just like blindly follow, but it's so important to have those people who can like kind of auto correct you or show you where your blind spots are.
I love that you said that. Show you where your blind spots are, because I mean, that's totally it, right? Like we can have the best intentions and know exactly what we're doing and know where we're headed, but if someone else can kind of warn us or that's been there before or something like that and can say, "Hey, just be sure that you watch out for this curve up here that's coming up." Man,
Yeah.
that's so helpful and can save us from so much heartache.
Right.
um, Let's do a quick rapid fire. This has been so much fun and I've learned so much. What is a book, article, person, or talk that's changed your life?
I think I have to go to, there's a book called The Lean Startup, and it talks all about, I mean, you guys can go read it, but it's all about the MVP, which is your minimum viable product, and how to grow with your audience, and pivot based on audience feedback, which is exactly how we're building Insync. That's why when you get into the beta is not too flashy. It's because we're really leaning on what's our audience saying and how do we need to build this with them, not with out of assumptions.
Good. I like that because I think simplicity is key, right? And so I
Yeah.
love that your book is a book on how to do that within your startup and how you're doing that. So I think that's genius. What is your favorite Friday night at home with your family?
I'm a big TV watcher, so I like just being able to sit back and watch TV and cuddle with all of my
Oh,
children.
and how many kids do you guys have?
We have two, a
Awesome. Boys or
2-year-old and a
girls?
4-year-old, boy and a girl. Our boy is 4. He's almost 5. He'll be in kindergarten. I can't believe that. I feel too young to have a kindergartner. Foster, and then Civil just turned 3. I just said she's 2. She turned 3 a couple weeks ago.
Oh my
Civil as in
gosh.
Civil War. I feel like I always have to like explain that. It's a V, not a B. Um,
I was actually going to ask you because my nephew's name is Foster. His actual name is Randolph Foster, but we call him Foster
yeah.
because he's named after family.
hmm
And so I wanted to know how you named your kids. How'd you pick those names?
Okay, so Foster. Well, if Foster's interesting, I will not go deep into it, but I Foster is not my husband's biological son. I was actually pregnant when I met my husband.
Oh,
And so
okay.
Foster was like, I had a name picked out, but my name was Megan Moore growing up, and I hated the alliteration. I hated it. Plus, it was the most like, basic white girl name ever, and I'm not basic. But anyways, I had a name picked out that was an S name, and I was like, I can't do it. I can't do double S name. I just can't. And so I had met my husband. It was like 3 days after we like met. And I was like, how do you feel about the name Foster? I just like randomly threw it out. And he was like, that's amazing. And I was like, okay. So it just stuck, but it was so fast, and it's special because we had like just met, and it was, I don't know, one of those moments of like,
Yeah.
I don't know, we dated fast. We got married 6 months after meeting. So it was crazy, but it was one of those like moments of like, I don't know, connection between me and my husband.
So
Um,
cool.
And then civil, I was sitting in a civil law class, actually a contract law class, and we were talking about civil law in school. Um, and I was pregnant with Foster, but we knew he was a boy, and we already named him. And I was like, "Oh, civil, that's a nice, that would make a really nice name." And so I like jokingly said it to Caleb, thinking he would hate it. And he was like, "Oh, I love that. Her name's Civil Lawrence, which is my
I
husband's
love
middle name."
it.
And so he's like, "I love it. That's amazing. It's like an author name." I'm like, "That's what I thought. Civil Lawrence Spaulding. That's a special name." And so when we got pregnant with her, it just stuck to the point that I was filling out her um, name birth application thing, whatever it's called. And I'm like writing it down. I'm like, wait a second, we haven't actually talked about this. We just like kept calling her Civil from when we were pregnant with Foster. And it's like 2 years later. I'm about to put this in writing. We still cool with that?
Are we sure? Are we sure we're good? Yeah, yeah. Okay, good. That's so funny. I love that so much. That's so cute. It's so adorable how he's just like, "Yep, love it. I'm on board." I love that.
They
That's
were
so
really
cute.
easy.
That's precious. Okay. What was your dream job as a kid?
Mm, as a kid, oh my gosh. What was my dream job as a kid? I was into music and art. And so, but gosh, I was that kid that second grade, I was selling hand painted band-aids on the playground with my girlfriend.
That's freaking genius.
For a quarter. You want a hand painted baby? It's gonna cost you. My parents have like this piece of paper of when I started, I got like one of those jewelry making kits. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to sell these. And I'm like, okay, 1 + 1 = free. Cause it was like Claire's, like you buy 2, get 1 free. And I just
Yeah.
like didn't know how to like write that. So I made this whole flyer that's like, if you buy 2, you get them for free.
Oh
So
my
my
God,
parents
that's
make fun
so
of
funny.
the flyer. So I guess I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I always had that spirit about me. But I was huge into music. I actually went to school I have a music business degree. I thought I was going to be a singer. And then I got pregnant and I was like, nah, no, I'm not doing a music career. No way.
That's hilarious. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. And hilarious too that that a baby totally changed the trajectory of your life because I feel the exact same way.
Yeah. I am glad though. I don't know that I don't
Same.
know I ever enjoyed music as much as I enjoy business.
Oh, that's so cool. What's your next vacation that you're planning with your family?
Okay, so it's our 5-year anniversary, and assuming that COVID is chills out by October, we're hoping to go to Tokyo.
Girl,
We've
it
been
better.
Yes, I know. I'm like, but I don't know what Japan's like. So, but if not Tokyo, New Orleans is our absolute favorite place in the universe because you can walk everywhere and not get tired. It's
Oh
amazing.
my gosh, hilarious that you said that because I keep reaching out to my girlfriends. I've never been to New Orleans. I've wanted to go for a really long time and I keep asking my husband and my husband is
Mm.
like not about it at all. So I'm like, I'm taking my girlfriends and we are going to New Orleans. So I'm so happy to hear you say that.
It is actually the best. It has the best food in America, hands down. If
Which
you want to go
is
in a
yeah, it's
oh,
totally the way to my heart. I'm very excited about it.
it's so good. And if you like, we went in January, so it's still really warm, or it had already been warm. Like it's already warm in January there. And then there's no one there because it's January. And it's also right before Mardi Gras. So nobody wants to come right before Mardi Gras. But it's so like the town's like all but empty. And you just like walk, you have the whole town to yourself. I'm like, oh my
Ah,
God. We walked like 36 miles and our legs didn't hurt in like a matter of days.
that's bananas.
There's no hills. They literally built a hill to teach kids what hills are.
Oh my gosh, that's so crazy. Oh my gosh, I can't wait till COVID is over now. Okay, tell us your best advice to help our listeners live with audacity.
Hmm. Yeah, I think fail fast and forward and just go for it. Like, don't be afraid of messing up. I think you hurt yourself more when you hold back and you don't try. Because like pivoting is such a thing, and you get so much valuable data from like moving quickly, and being
And
able to take
failing.
that information. Yeah, if you fail, who cares? I've failed so many times, like I can't even tell you, but I have learned so much from those failures that they're not even failures, they're just like data on
Yeah.
what's next.
Oh
And so don't
man.
be afraid, like just go for it. Like if you and go for it while you're passionate about it. Like in that heat of the moment, like don't talk yourself out. Like because there's so much fuel in that special inspiration place
In
to
that first 5 seconds, just go.
exactly. Yes.
Oh, I love it. This has been so much freaking fun to hang out and talk with you. Where can people find more information about you and InSync and all the things?
Yep. So I think you have a link to my personal Facebook. If anyone wants to connect with me there, that's the best place to connect with me and follow the journey and all of that stuff. And then InSync is on Instagram at insync.app. And if you would like to be a part of our beta program, then we have signups available at insyncapp.co.
I love it. And I totally signed up to be in the beta. I can't wait to try it. It's going to be so awesome. Thank you so much for being here. This has been so incredibly fun. And literally, I feel like we could just sit here and talk all day long.
Yeah. Though that's the sevens on us, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thanks so much for having me on.
Hey, y'all, I had to jump in here real quick because I need a favor. If you are loving the Live with Audacity podcast, I need you to do me a big solid favor and share it with your friends, share it on social media, and go to the Apple iTunes link and click subscribe, rate it, review it. I need to know your feedback, and I want to keep putting this out for you, so I really need your help to get the message out. Thank you so, so much for your loyalty and your super kind and sweet words. They mean so terribly much to me.